Okay, you are recording this meeting. Be sure to let everyone know that they're being recorded. Okay, go ahead, Ben.
Hello, my name is Ben Martineau, and I'm an advocate with Homeless Voices for Justice. Homeless Voices for Justice is a grassroots organization organized by people who are or have experienced homelessness. We seek to empower people experiencing homelessness and poverty, whose perspectives are often excluded from the development of policies and politics through protests, education, positive policy change, and reform. As part of our annual You Don't Need a Home to Vote campaign, we are interviewing candidates running for local, state, and federal offices on the issues that are important to us. Today we are talking to Chellie Pingree, who is running for the House of Representatives. Can you please introduce yourself to the voters and tell us why you decided to run? Can you please introduce yourself to voters and tell us why you decided to run for the House of Representatives?
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm Chellie Pingree. I've been serving in the 1st Congressional District of the House of Representatives this is my 6th term. And prior to that, I was in the Maine legislature. I have also, for much of my life, been a small business owner, and I also run an organic farm, which is food and farming issues are something I've been involved in most of my life. I first ran for a variety of reasons, but most of them are still true. Unfortunately, when I first ran for the legislature in 1992, one of my issues was universal access to health care, raising the minimum wage, taking better care of our environment. Many of those things are still the same today, and I feel like we can't back down on the fight for any of those. Particularly these last 4 years have been really difficult, I think, with an administration that doesn't have any of those as priority and also has worked really hard to divide us, not unite us. I don't think I have to tell anyone on this call that, he's had a platform that opposes universal access to healthcare or raising the minimum wage or organizing labor unions. He doesn't believe in climate change. He's anti-immigration reform. He doesn't care about racial justice issues. And it's not just that I'm obviously not running for president, but working that administration has really set the agenda. So sometimes when we could even get bipartisan cooperation in the House of Representatives, we couldn't get it with this administration. So I feel like those are really important fights. I certainly hope we have a new administration to work with. But even if we don't, we need people who can stand up and fight for the issues that people of Maine care about. And I'd like to be able to continue to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sharon, Jim, do you have your questions in front of you that were delivered?
Yeah,
Yes, I do. I know firsthand that the social safety net in our country is unable to meet current needs. Social service agencies and government safety net programs are dealing with less available funding for vital life-saving programs. What's your solution for rebuilding our country's social safety net?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that's a really, really important question, a really good one. And I think during this COVID-19 crisis that we've gone through, we've seen firsthand how thin the safety net is, how much it's broken, how many challenges that people have faced. And they're everything from people being evicted from their homes to losing their jobs, not having adequate unemployment insurance to cover them, or only having the COVID pandemic on insurance for a short period of time, inability to keep a small business open, and in Maine and in many other places in the country, just people not getting enough food to put on their table. So these are all, and the list is even longer, as I don't have to tell you. And of course, healthcare crises with people not having adequate healthcare during a time when they need it the most. So all of those are issues that I focus on as a member of Congress and have worked on, and have been important to Maine, frankly, all the time I've been there. But I think now we can really see how badly broken our social safety net is. So I hope that gives us the opportunity kind of have a renewed focus on many of these things and to make the case, for instance, in healthcare, why we can't have healthcare attached to people's employment. You know, you lose your job, maybe you get unemployment benefits, but you've lost your healthcare benefits and you can't afford to pay for them with your unemployment. So, I mean, that's just one of the many things. If kids aren't going to school, where a lot of kids get 1 or 2 meals a day, then how does your family get access to food? How do we make sure kids have enough food? And obviously, housing has been a huge crisis during the pandemic with people being evicted and not adequate support to provide a moratorium on eviction for as long as we've needed it. So they're, like I said, they're all issues that I care deeply about. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, so much of my focus on funding areas is on each one of these. They're all part of my priorities every year. And, you know, I absolutely support things like Medicare for all. I work on a lot of food and hunger related issues because I'm also on the Agriculture Committee. So increasing people's SNAP benefits, making making sure people have more access to healthy fruits and vegetables, better school lunch programs, more access, less shaming in school lunch programs, making sure everyone has access to it. They're all things I really care about, have been fighting about, and think that we have to work even harder in the next session of Congress because so many of the important programs have been underfunded or undone by this administration. And we have a lot to fix.
Jim, you're next.
Okay. Good afternoon, Representative Pingree. I'd like to preface my question by telling you briefly a little bit about myself.
Great.
Most of my life, I was a master electrician, a contractor, and I made enough money to be able to house myself. But due to my struggle with alcohol, I became homeless, and I'm in recovery now. I haven't had a drink since the year 2008, and I'm grateful for that. And I've had a lot of help from various organizations like Milestone and Alcoholics Anonymous and Preble Street. And in particular, there was a residential treatment center called Serenity House in Portland. And a lot of these treatment centers have closed down because of lack of funding. So the importance of access to recovery services is extremely important to me. And it's something that's taken a back seat a little bit because everybody's focused on the coronavirus situation. But the opiate addiction problem and alcoholism in general is still makes a substantial impact and contributes to homelessness. So do you have any plans to make recovery assistance more available to people?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and thank you, Jim, for sharing some of your own story. I'm happy for you that you've been in recovery for so long and that you've been able to use some of the services that you have in Maine. But you're right, we've lost some like Serenity House, and certainly funding has been challenging. You know, even pre-pandemic, we weren't funding enough treatment centers. We didn't have enough services for people. And I've been a longtime supporter, and particularly in recent years, in trying to get more funding for treatment centers, prevention, you know, support systems for people. And I know that during this crisis, we've seen an upturn in substance use disorder and, you know, people's use of alcohol. It's a real challenging time for mental health services. It's, you know, it's a really hard time for people to live in isolation, to have lost their job, to be struggling, perhaps, you know, losing their home because of eviction or inability to pay the rent. So there's just an awful lot we have to do. But I just have fully supported funding and will continue to do so for more of those services, and really appreciate it. I've been to visit Milestone a couple of times and talk to them about the work they're doing, and there are often stupid government restrictions about how many beds you can have or how long people can stay, and you know, just all kinds of things that make it even more difficult for people to use the system, even sometimes when it's there. So I have to tell you, I'm just really lucky because I have two great people who work on my staff who are completely focused on healthcare, mental health, substance use disorders, just all those things, because you have to stay on your toes all the time, particularly with this Department of Health and Human Services about their desire to take away the services that we have, to reduce the funding, to change the regulations, and we need these things now more than ever. So you can count on me to have that focus and to do everything we can going into the future.
Thank you.
So the next question is about SNAP. As you're probably well aware, there has been lots of discussion, mainly in the Senate, about increasing SNAP benefits by 15% and raising the minimum SNAP benefit from $16 to $30. However, while this is debated, Americans are going hungry. What will you do to expand SNAP funding, reduce barriers, and make it more accessible for all who need it?
Yeah, well, I sit on the Agriculture Committee and I work on agriculture appropriations, and SNAP benefits are funded through the agriculture budget, USDA. And since I came to Congress, I have been working to increase the benefits, to, as I said earlier, get people to have access to more healthy fruits and vegetables with their SNAP dollars. And now during this time that we're in is no different. The reason the focus is on the Senate around this is because the House has already approved an increase to SNAP benefits. We passed that in the HEROES Act, which was back in May. This week, we're going to pass another bill to reinforce it. But as you know, the Senate has been unwilling to take up this issue. And we're just hoping that they will. We have had a few small gains. We were able to increase access on people's SNAP benefit cards during the pandemic for people who whose kids weren't actively in school and might miss a school lunch program, and we just got an extension of that. But look, I'm just appalled that we live in a country that's the wealthiest country in the world. And we would even have to argue about letting people go hungry. There's, Maine is a state that's continued to be challenged. Our children, our veterans, our old people, our, senior citizens all struggle with access to food, as do, everyone else, many other people in the population, both rural and urban. So this will continue to be a priority for me. And, I just think it's ridiculous. We ask people to get along with a small amount of SNAP benefits that they have today, and that we would ever try to take that away or be unwilling to increase it. So it will, like I said, it's under the jurisdiction of my committee. So we spend a lot of time having hearings and working on this. And I just hope we can get to the point where our colleagues stop making this an issue, because it shouldn't be.
Yeah, the next question happens to do with renter protection during the COVID. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen different levels of government take several steps to protect renters, including banning evictions and developing rental assistance programs. Do you believe that the federal government should continue to take steps to protect renters from eviction? If so, what should be done?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important thing. And again, in the HEROES Act that we passed in May, and we'll pass another version of it this week, we had funding for support for renters. I know that there's been some moratoriums on eviction, but they've been restricted to government programs. So only housing that was funded through, HUD or rural development or one of the federal programs. So that didn't cover everybody. And at some point, you have to have funding behind it, not just the rules, because under many of the eviction moratoriums, they still had a provision that when it ended, then you have to pay a lump sum of all your rent. So, that doesn't really help people. Say you get 4 months off of having to pay your rent, then on the 5th month, you got to pay all of it. You don't have that money then if you didn't have it before. So the bill that we passed in May and that we're going to pass again this week has a lot of funding in there to provide for financial assistance as well, so that you can't have a landlord that demands all that rent at the end, and expands the coverage. And also, there are circumstances where the landlord themselves is struggling because maybe it's just a two-family home. They still have to make their mortgage payments. So we need to provide assistance so that you don't, have a moratorium, but then the landlord themselves is out, or maybe has to default on their mortgage because they can't pay it anyway. So that's why we thought it was really important to have funding behind it. And I'll continue to support that and hope that we can move forward on that.
Thank you.
Sure.
So both COVID-19 and police brutality have shown us that we need to focus on systemic racism in this country. Black, Indigenous, and people of color are overrepresented in both homelessness and poverty right here in Maine. What will you do to dismantle systemic racism within social services? And how will you prioritize the needs of Black, Indigenous, and people of color constituents?
Yeah, those are all really important issues. And as tragic as some of the incidents we've seen in the past year, I do appreciate that it has started a new conversation about police brutality and systemic racism. And, just because we're in the whitest state in the nation doesn't mean that people can turn their heads and say it doesn't happen everywhere, because it certainly does. So I've supported a variety of bills. We passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the House, and that covers a variety of things. It bans chokeholds, it bans, or it reduces the militarization of the police, the federal programs that were supplying military equipment and tanks. It requires police training on racial bias. I think there are 2 or 3 other things in there. I'm just can't remember right now, but we've had another bill that eliminates qualified immunity, which was one of the provisions that made it really difficult to convict a police officer who, was committing a crime when they should have been helping the person. So, and we've had a variety of other pieces around policing, and I think that's just really, really important. It's not a federal issue, but I know many municipalities have started to have residence requirements for their police because some of the challenges, like in the situation in Minneapolis, you had an awful lot of people in the police force who live in distant suburbs, they're not neighbors to the people they're policing, and so you don't have the relationships that people should have. So there's a lot of things that I think we should be doing and throughout our judicial system, and it's true with how our laws have worked, how our courts work, and almost every step of the way there is a racial bias. Black men and men of color are more likely to be killed by the police, more likely to end up in jail. Just a whole lot of things throughout our system. Also on the healthcare front and the COVID-19 front, Barbara Lee recently sponsored a bill that would make sure that more of the funding that came to support testing and tracing and COVID-19 related healthcare issues was distributed to community-based organizations. A lot of times we just send that money directly to the states or the municipalities, but it doesn't get down to the community level. And in a lot of situations, and I think some of this is true in Maine, where we have a disproportionate amount of people of color who've been affected by COVID-19, sometimes you need to have access in your community, someone who speaks your language, or you feel safe believing that you can trust them to take the test or to do the tracing. And so I think making some of those changes are really important. Of course, also in Maine, we have 4 federally recognized tribes, and racism with the tribes it goes back to the earliest days of settling our state. So we have a lot to atone for and to acknowledge with our relationship with the tribes. And so going forward, I think there's a lot of things that I think we need to do, and I don't need to list them all now, but I'm the vice chair of the Interior Committee, our committee has oversight of the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Education, Bureau of Indian Health. So I've spent many, many hours in public hearings about tribal issues across the country. We always have Maine representatives from our own tribes come down and speak at those. But my point is this a really important national issue, because what's going on in Maine has gone on around the country. And certainly, disproportionate impact of COVID-19 has been true in all tribal communities. But some of that is related to the fact that there's just abysmal healthcare, abysmal education, lower life expectancy. So anyway, those are just huge, huge issues that we have to deal with. So sort of lumping them all into one thing, I think it's just really important that we spend more time looking at the systemic racism in our country. It's just as important to do in Maine as it is everywhere else. And besides the things that we can kind of focus on, it also covers all the other issues that we're talking about. Access to healthcare, access to housing, education, how we fund public education, how we encourage kids to go to college and pay for their loans. It's the bias is there everywhere, and we have to have a renewed kind of focus on how we deal with it if we're ever going to have equity in our country.
And Cher, you have the last question.
Mm-hmm. Participation in the democratic process is incredibly hard for people experiencing homelessness and poverty. If re-elected, how will you maintain your accountability to your unhoused constituents and your constituents who are experiencing poverty?
Yeah, that's a good question. As much as anything, I just want to say I'm grateful that you're all taking the time to raise your voices today. And I hope, I hope you feel you have access to my office or me at any time. I know this is a very strange year, but we do have an office in downtown Portland, and encourage people, when we're during a normal time, to come and chat with us, even if they don't have access to contacting us on the internet or, all of the other systems. But I do think, Maine and our urban areas in Portland in particular, we just need to have, we need to have far more access to the funding that will make it possible for people to have, better housing, better access to food, better ways to engage in their community. And certainly when it comes to the voting process, I'm so glad you guys do all you can to make sure that people know you can vote even if you don't have a home. But I think this year we're more concerned than ever about, how do we make sure that everybody gets the right to vote, that their votes are counted, that, their absentee votes aren't discounted, that laws, that the federal government doesn't stop states from allowing people to vote without a photo ID, or some of the highly restrictive things that have been suggested at the federal level. But I appreciate your question, and I hope you'll let me know anytime there are things that we can do to support the concerns and needs that you have, and certainly make sure that we continue to get funding and increase the funding for all of the things that we know are important.
Well, thank you, Representative Pingree, for taking the time to talk with us today, and we're excited to share your answers with our community.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to share your concerns with me. And like I said, I hope you'll never hesitate to get in touch with me or my office. We always need to know how we can do everything we can to be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.